Welcome to another podcast. This is podcast number 9. I haven't been preparing too much because I've always said I want to be as spontaneous as I can be. And I think it's better we've got enough things that are so prepared in these days, so let's do it in a more spontaneous way. Anyway, today I wanted to devote the time mainly to listening for the performer, and especially the pianist. And I think it's such an important subject because the way we listen is often how we play. Our performance is usually a shadow or maybe a part of the actual listening process. With that, thinking about that, I've actually also done something more than that. Over the years, I've been writing a number of tips and things for pianists. They're called magical tips. And Madge, of course, with a D. But okay, that's something I've been asked to say a little bit more about that, because there are many people who've been asking questions about that. So I'll include several points that I've actually been discussing in the magic tips. I think some of the things that we see in the performances are so directly connected with our listening, not only how we play, but the way we use our body in performance, the way we actually use our body when we are playing. Is it a direct playing, like something like this, for instance, or is it more a feeling not only of the music but also of the instrument? To find the heart of the instrument, we need to get deeper into it. We got to find really the soul of the instrument, literally. And I think this is something we need to know a few things about the actual playing mechanism, the way we actually approach a note. Even it's just so strange that we just on a piano, we just have to put our finger down and we get a note. And okay, it's so simple. But it's, of course, not anywhere near the way we're going to get closer to the instrument. We've got to somehow find the balance of the key. Balance the key so that we really get a sound. We get a sound really out of the instrument. We've got to make the piano speak. That's basically the whole aim. If you can get a piano speaking, then you've got somehow the way of playing and making a piece work, a piece sound for an audience. And I think these things need a bit of working on. There are several ways that I've often thought that are important, and one of them is something I've learned from Busoni. As you probably know, I did a lot of work on Busoni, and I recorded 6 of his, I made 6 CDs of his piano works. And these recordings, I learned a lot when I was doing this, because I was making an incredibly deep study of the work and the way of playing of Busoni. And what I discovered with that is the way he played often was the following. I'll give a demonstration of that. He would, for instance, let the note, when it comes back, that was the way the next note was going to be played. So the actual way of rebounding with the key gives the actual impetus for the next note. So you play that, and then you get that upwards movement of the finger, which gives the impetus for the next finger. This is something I think was so important. So that means that it's not always coming out of the finger or out of the arm, it's coming also out of the key. So that in fact the piano starts to play the finger. And I would like to go further and say that something like Alfred Cortot often said, that the finger is actually an extension, or should be an extension, of the key. So you actually, by making your finger longer, you're actually extending the key right through to your upper arm. And I think that's an important part also of performance. These are a few of the basic things that are in my magic tips. But this is only the beginning, because there's such a lot more happening. And that, for instance, another point that I would like to mention is going up is not the same thing as going down. It sounds so easy and it sounds obvious. I mean, it sounds quite stupid, even in fact, in my ears. But the thing is, when you are going up, you are going actually up, you're under, and going back, you're going over. So going back is high, going up is a little lower. So you're actually using a circular motion. So this motion is for scale passages, for instance, happening. And also, not only are you using a circular motion, you are actually, by doing that, when you're coming down, you're going more forwards into the key. So coming down, this is more forwards than this is. So you have those two different things. There are two principles involved. Actually, the forwards motion and the motion of going under, and to be able to get that movement going in a sort of eclipse circular way. Well, it sounds a little bit more complicated than it is. When you're actually doing it, it's actually fun to do. But when you're actually doing, for instance, when you're playing these pieces, and so on. There's a feeling that it just fits the music. I think it's in fact one of the things that I think that Franz Liszt would have done. It's interesting when you look at many of the drawings that have been made of the time of pianists in those days. Liszt, always his hands are like this. Same thing with Glinka, Brahms. Absolutely high, not low, but high. There's of course a reason for it, because it somehow helps you to make these movements with the arm, that you actually involve the arm in the playing. So the arm is it's not only the finger, it's also the arm behind the finger. And I think these things need in the beginning to be worked out, and somehow we've got to think about them, because you might not do that in a natural way. I do think, though, that when you look at young pianists, very young, in the ages of 8 to 12 years of age, there's a very strong chance that they do it automatically, because it feels quite natural. And that brings me to a point which I think is important: making circles. I think making circles in piano playing is very important. I think somehow it brings us closer to the instrument, and it helps the instrument to come closer to us. That is something I think is very important. Not quite like what I saw once with Horowitz, when he was coming on stage and he sits behind the instrument, but the instrument was too far away, so he pulls the instrument towards him. How that was possible, I don't know, because evidently the brakes were not on the piano. But anyway, he did it in that way, of course, to the amusement of everyone in the hall, everyone laughing loudly, of course. It was certainly a way of releasing the tension, and I think it was done purposely. I'm sure he did that purposely. I didn't ask him, I should have asked him. One of the things I didn't think, but it was not that important, of course. Okay, so that sort of thing is the beginning of the direction that I think is good to work on. And I hope that is a little bit clear what I've mentioned. When we're talking in a dialogue, of course, it goes much easier, because I don't have the response of what I would normally have, and that makes it a little bit harder to explain it. Just as what I call black and white lessons. Okay, that's said and done. There are a few more things that I'd like to mention. I think it's very important when at first starting pieces. I think we often need to go back to just playing, just letting the fingers fall, just letting them fall without any energy behind it. Either just let them just fall with gravity. It's not easy to do. To get to that point, it's sometimes necessary to repeat notes. One of the ways that Michelangelo used to work is often repeating notes, and I think that's very important also. Repeating notes to get the balance of the key and to feel the way the key responds. We somehow don't always do these things, and I think they need to be worked on. These are the things I remember working on very much with Sarabji, and that's just a few points, and there are a few more things also. Another thing also which I think is fascinating, and that's the following. Our fingers are not the same lengths. We have different lengths of fingers, and that's interesting because Arthur Schnabel mentioned that is one of the energy possibilities of the hand. There is an inborn energy. The fact the fingers are different lengths, they can actually play without doing anything. We don't have to do anything. We can do it very, very easily. And of course it can be loud. That's not a very difficult point. If you can do it, just do it soft on 2 notes. You can do it on 3 and 4. It's just a question of letting the finger go. And I think it's important to be able to play pieces like that. It might not be the way we would perform the pieces, but it's certainly a way of just preparing the hand to be able to adjust to every difference of every note basically. It's the way we would adjust to that. So those few things I think are important. One more thing I think has always been important in my thinking is to play on the pad of the finger. The pads are, of course, the soft part of the finger. Just to play on that part. No, not necessarily with a completely flat finger, and certainly not with a curved finger, but just on the pads. If you do that, you're actually putting your hand in the same position as when you just let it fall, and when you're walking, and you just put the hand on the keyboard, and that's the point that you get the pads. So if you play on the pads, you're automatically holding your hand basically good. I think those things are useful to work on, and there are many more little things that I've discovered. Of course, I'm talking about the arm leading the fingers. That is absolutely necessary in playing. That's just something which we need to be able to do. The fingers don't lead. The fingers are not first. The arm is the way that the fingers move, and as Schnabel said, it's not fingering, it's arming that you've got to think about. We've got to make use of where the arms are, the placing of the fingers, the hands, and the for the different areas of the instrument. Very important in contemporary music. How do you do these sort of things? How do you do that? You've got to be really able to. You've got to be able to do it without looking at it. Another point. Studying without looking at the keyboard or even closing the eyes. I think it's so important to close the eyes when studying, because I think we hear better. Maybe it's not for everyone the case, but I think it certainly was for me, and I'm sure for my students it's certainly been the case. That is something I think. So it's often the simple things that I think really make a big difference in performance. And that is the thing that I think leads to listening to the movement, we're actually listening to the movement, because the movement is the actual sound. The way we move becomes the sound. It's not only how we move, it's how we feel when moving also, of course. That feeling behind that movement. The great performances, I think, always have a lot of thought on this point. And that's when I became very interested and inspired by the performances of many legendary pianists. I started studying this certainly 50, 60 years ago. And not only pianists, but also singers, as Horowitz was very much involved with Battistini. He liked the singing of Battistini and many of the great bel canto singers of the time. But we can study and learn a lot from the way of playing. How they sang is, I think, in many ways, how we've got to learn to play. And that's a fascinating study. Well, I hope I haven't bored you with all of this. It's a bit of a alphabetical, a list of things which I found useful over the years, and I've really enjoyed working on it. And it's fun to do it, so try it out.